What if I told you that a 5-year-old girl vanished into thin air from inside her own home while 4 people were watching? Not from a park. Not from a store. From her kitchen. In 2 minutes. In broad daylight. With her mother standing 20 feet away. No screams. No struggle. No trace. And 4 years later, law enforcement still has no answers. This is the disappearance of Summer Wells, and what happened in those 2 minutes defies everything we think we know about missing children cases. Before we dive into one of the most disturbing and inexplicable missing child cases in modern American history, I need you to do something. If cases like this matter to you, if you believe that every missing child deserves attention, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications. Because here at Cold Case Crimelab, we don't just tell these stories, we keep them alive until answers are found. Every single subscriber helps push these cases into the light where they belong. Now let's talk about what happened to Summer Wells. June 15, 2021. 5:30 in the afternoon. The sun is still high in the Tennessee sky. It's warm. That thick, humid kind of warmth that makes your shirt stick to your back. The kind of summer day where kids play outside until their parents call them in for dinner. In the rural community of Beech Creek, near Rogersville, Tennessee, a 5-year-old girl walks across a dusty yard toward her house. Her name is Summer Moon Utah Wells. She has blonde hair that catches the sunlight. Bright blue eyes that seem to take in everything around her. Her hands are dirty. Soil caked under her tiny fingernails from planting flowers with her grandmother just minutes before. She smells like childhood, like summer sweat and fresh earth and the outdoors. Her grandmother has just given her a piece of candy. Summer is heading home. The house sits on Ben Hill Road, a winding, narrow road deep in the Appalachian Mountains of northeast Tennessee. This isn't suburban America. This isn't a neighborhood with sidewalks and streetlights. This is isolated, rural country. The kind of place where your nearest neighbor might be a quarter-mile away. Where the forest is thick and dark and seems to swallow sound. Summer walks toward the house. Inside, her 3 older brothers are gathered around the kitchen table, their faces illuminated by the glow of screens, watching videos. Normal kid stuff. A normal afternoon. Summer's mother, Candace Bly, is watching. She's standing roughly 20 feet away. Not across town. Not in another room with the door closed. 20 feet. Close enough to see her daughter clearly. Close enough to hear her if she called out. Candace watches as Summer reaches the kitchen door. Watches as her little girl pulls it open. Watches as Summer steps inside the house, into the kitchen where her brothers sit. 2 minutes pass. Candace Bly adjusts her knee brace. It takes maybe 30 seconds. Maybe a minute at most. When she looks up, when she goes to check on Summer, her daughter is gone. Not hiding in a closet. Not playing in another room. Not outside in the yard. Gone. Vanished. Disappeared from a house where 4 other people, 4 witnesses, were present. Evaporated in the amount of time it takes to tie your shoe. To send a text message. To glance away from your child for what feels like a heartbeat. This is the moment that changed everything. The moment that launched one of Tennessee's longest-running Amber Alert investigations. The moment that would consume more than 6,500 tips, search over 3,000 acres of some of the most treacherous mountain terrain in the eastern United States, and mobilize more than 100 law enforcement agencies. For years later, there have been no arrests. No named suspects. No conclusive evidence about what happened in those 2 minutes. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, an agency that has handled countless missing persons cases, admits this case is outside the norm. And when law enforcement says something is outside the norm, you need to understand what that means. It means this case doesn't fit the patterns they're trained to recognize. It means the usual explanations don't apply. It means that something happened that shouldn't be possible. Tonight, we're going to examine everything. What investigators know. What they don't know. What the evidence suggests. What the timeline reveals. And why, after 4 years of intensive investigation, the disappearance of Summer Wells from her own home remains one of the most baffling missing child cases in modern American history. But first, we need to understand who Summer was. Because she wasn't just a statistic. She wasn't just another face on a missing poster. She was a real little girl with a personality, with quirks, with a life that was just beginning. Summer Moon Utah Wells was born on February 4, 2016, in Hawkins County, Tennessee. From the very beginning, her life was rooted in the mountains of northeast Tennessee. This was her home. These woods, these hills, this isolated rural landscape was all she knew. By the time she turned 5 years old, Summer was living with her parents, Dawn Wells and Candace Bly, and her 3 older brothers. The family occupied a property on Ben Hill Road in the 100 block, deep in the Beech Creek community. To call this area remote would be an understatement. This is Appalachian country. Steep hollers and ridges. Roads that twist and turn so sharply that if you don't know them, you could easily get lost. Dense forest canopy that blocks out the sun even at midday. Cell phone reception is spotty at best. In some areas, it's non-existent. There are no gas stations on every corner. No 24-hour convenience stores. No constant flow of traffic. The nearest town of any size is Rogersville, and even that is small by most standards. The terrain itself is challenging. These aren't gentle, rolling hills. These are mountains. Steep inclines that make walking difficult and dangerous. Thick underbrush that can hide a person just feet off a trail. Rocky outcroppings. Drop-offs. Creek beds that flood without warning. This is beautiful country, but it's unforgiving country. The kind of wilderness that demands respect. For a 5-year-old child, this environment presents obvious dangers. But Summer wasn't unfamiliar with her surroundings. She'd lived here her entire life. This was her backyard, her playground. According to her family, Summer was a bright, energetic child. Active. Curious. The kind of kid who wanted to be outside, exploring, playing. But on June 15, 2021, something happened that no amount of familiarity with the area could prevent. Something that would turn Summer's family, her community, and eventually the entire nation's attention to a single, devastating question: where is Summer Wells? Let's walk through that day. Every detail matters. Every minute counts. Because somewhere in the sequence of events that unfolded that afternoon, there's a clue. There has to be. The day started normally enough. Summer spent time with her grandmother, planting flowers. Imagine that scene for a moment. A grandmother and her granddaughter, hands in the dirt, talking about whatever 5-year-olds talk about. Flowers. Colors. Maybe what they were going to have for dinner. Simple moments that become precious beyond measure when they turn out to be the last. After planting flowers, Summer's grandmother gave her a piece of candy. A small gesture. A treat. The kind of thing grandmothers do. Summer took her candy and headed back toward the house. Her mother, Candace, could see her. The distance between them was minimal. 20 feet. In an urban setting, that's the length of a small room. In an open yard, it's nothing. A few seconds of walking. Summer reached the kitchen door. This is important. She didn't disappear outside. She made it to the house. She opened the door. She went inside. Her 3 brothers were right there, in the kitchen, at the table. 4 other people in the immediate vicinity. 4 potential witnesses. Candace Bly has stated that she looked away briefly to adjust her knee brace. This is a detail that has been scrutinized extensively. How long does it take to adjust a knee brace? 30 seconds? A minute? Could it have been longer? Could time have felt shorter than it actually was in the chaos that followed? When Candace looked up, Summer was gone. Not in the kitchen. Not with her brothers. Not anywhere Candace could immediately see. The initial reaction was probably not panic. Not yet. When a 5-year-old isn't where you expect them to be, the first assumption is usually innocent. She went to her room. She went to the bathroom. She's playing somewhere. But as seconds turned into minutes, as Candace checked the obvious places and didn't find Summer, the situation changed. The concern escalated. Where is she? Summer? Can you hear me? Summer. The search of the immediate property would have happened quickly. Parents know their homes. They know the hiding spots. The places kids go. Under beds. In closets. Behind furniture. None of those places produced Summer. The search expanded outside. Maybe she went back out to the yard. Maybe she went to see her grandmother again. Maybe she wandered toward the woods. But Summer wasn't outside either. She wasn't in the yard where she'd just been minutes before. She wasn't on the path to her grandmother's house. She wasn't anywhere. At some point, and we don't know exactly when, the Wells family called 911. That call set into motion a massive response. Local law enforcement arrived first. Sheriff's deputies from Hawkins County. They began a systematic search of the property and the surrounding area. But this wasn't like searching a suburban home with a fenced backyard. This was acres of land. Woods. Outbuildings. Terrain that could hide a small child easily. As word spread, more resources poured in. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took over coordination. Search and rescue teams were deployed. Canine units. Teams trained in wilderness search and recovery. Volunteers from the community. Everyone who could help, did. The first hours of a missing child case are critical. Every law enforcement officer knows this. Every parent's worst nightmare is unfolding in real time, and the clock is ticking. Because statistics tell us that the longer a child is missing, the less likely the outcome is good. The first 3 hours are crucial. The first 24 hours are everything. An Amber Alert was issued. Summer's face appeared on highway signs, on television screens, on social media feeds across Tennessee and beyond. A 5-year-old girl. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. Last seen wearing a pink shirt and gray pants. If you see her, call 911 immediately. The search effort that first night was massive. Searchers combed through the woods surrounding the Wells property using flashlights and thermal imaging equipment. They called Summer's name over and over, hoping to hear a response. Hoping she was just lost, just scared, just waiting to be found. But the night passed without finding her. The sun rose on June 16th. Summer had been missing for over 12 hours. The search continued, now in daylight. More volunteers arrived. More law enforcement. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing additional resources and expertise. Over the following days and weeks, the search effort expanded to cover more than 3,000 acres. To understand how massive this is, picture roughly 5 square miles of mountain wilderness. Steep hillsides. Dense vegetation. Areas where you can't see more than a few feet in front of you. Places where even experienced hikers struggle to navigate. Search teams used every tool available. Dogs trained to detect human scent. Drones equipped with cameras. Helicopters with infrared technology. Divers searched nearby bodies of water. Nothing. No sign of Summer. No clothing. No footprints leading into the woods. No evidence that she had wandered away and gotten lost. This is where the case becomes truly baffling. In a typical missing child case involving a young child who wanders off, there are usually clues. Footprints. Torn clothing caught on branches. something that indicates the direction the child traveled. But Summer left nothing. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist the moment she stepped into that kitchen. Law enforcement interviewed everyone. The family. Neighbors. Anyone who might have seen something, heard something, noticed anything unusual that day. Tips started pouring in. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. People calling to report sightings. Theories. Suspicions. Every single tip had to be investigated, followed up on, ruled in, or ruled out. Some tips seemed promising. Reports of a child matching Summer's description seen in a vehicle. Spotted at a gas station. Seen with an unknown adult. Each one sent investigators scrambling, chasing down leads that ultimately went nowhere. None of them were Summer. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Because what I'm about to tell you next is where this case takes an even darker turn. As the investigation continued, attention inevitably turned to the family. This is standard procedure in missing child cases. Statistically, when a child disappears, family members are often involved. Not always. But often enough that investigators have to look there first. It's an ugly reality of these cases, but it's reality nonetheless. Dawn Wells and Candace Bly found themselves under intense scrutiny. Their lives were dissected. Their backgrounds investigated. Their statements analyzed and reanalyzed. The public, desperate for answers, formed opinions. Social media exploded with theories, accusations, and amateur detective work. Dawn Wells has a criminal history. This became public knowledge quickly. He has prior convictions, including one for sexual offenses. When this information emerged, many people immediately assumed he must be involved in Summer's disappearance. The court of public opinion can be swift and brutal. But having a criminal history doesn't automatically make someone guilty of a new crime. Law enforcement has to follow evidence, not assumptions. And as of today, 4 years later, neither Dawn Wells nor Candace Bly has been charged with any crime related to Summer's disappearance. Neither has been publicly named as a suspect. This doesn't mean they're not under investigation. It doesn't mean law enforcement has ruled them out. It means that whatever evidence investigators have, it hasn't been enough to bring charges. And that raises important questions about what evidence actually exists in this case. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has been tight-lipped about many details of the investigation. This is intentional. In active cases, especially high-profile ones, law enforcement holds back certain information. They do this for strategic reasons. Information that only the real perpetrator would know can be used to verify confessions or eliminate false leads. Revealing too much can compromise the investigation. But the lack of public information has also fueled frustration and speculation. People want answers. Summer's case has been featured on numerous true crime podcasts, YouTube channels, and social media platforms. Armchair detectives have created elaborate theories about what happened. Some believe Summer wandered into the woods and succumbed to the elements. Others believe she was abducted by a stranger. Still others believe someone in the family knows more than they're saying. Let's examine each possibility, because understanding what might have happened requires looking at all angles. Theory 1. Summer wandered off and got lost in the woods. This is the explanation many people initially assumed. A 5-year-old child goes outside, wanders into the forest, becomes disoriented, and can't find her way back. In terrain like that surrounding the Wells property, this is certainly possible. Children have died of exposure in wilderness areas after wandering away from home. But there are problems with this theory. First, the timeline. Summer was last seen going into the house, not heading toward the woods. For her to have wandered off, she would have had to exit the house without anyone noticing, cross the yard, and enter the forest. In a matter of minutes. While her mother was 20 feet away and her brothers were in the kitchen. Second, the search effort. Over 3,000 acres were searched by professional search and rescue teams. Dogs trained to detect human scent found nothing. If Summer had wandered into the woods, there should have been some trace of her. A scent trail. Footprints. Clothing. Something. The complete absence of any evidence is unusual. Third, Summer's familiarity with the area. She lived there her entire life. She knew the property. While 5-year-olds certainly can and do get lost, Summer wasn't in an unfamiliar environment. This doesn't make it impossible, but it does raise questions. Theory 2. Summer was abducted by a stranger. This is every parent's nightmare. The idea that someone was watching, waiting, and took Summer in a moment of opportunity. It's terrifying. And it's possible. But again, the logistics are challenging. The Wells property is remote. It's not on a main road with heavy traffic. It's not an area where someone could easily surveil a house without being noticed. For a stranger to abduct Summer, they would have had to know the layout of the property, know where Summer would be, and act in a window of just a few minutes. Additionally, there were no reports of unfamiliar vehicles in the area that day. No strangers seen lurking around. No suspicious activity reported by neighbors. In rural communities, people tend to notice vehicles they don't recognize. They pay attention to strangers. The absence of any such reports is significant. That said, the absence of reports doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's possible someone was there who wasn't noticed. It's possible a vehicle passed through without raising suspicion. But abduction by a complete stranger, while not impossible, seems less likely given the circumstances and setting. Theory 3. Someone Summer knew was involved. This is the theory that law enforcement likely focuses on, because statistics support it. Most children who are abducted are taken by someone they know. A family member. A family friend. An acquaintance. Someone who had access, opportunity, and motive. The challenge with this theory is proving it. If someone close to Summer took her, they would presumably be part of the immediate circle of people present that day. They would have been interviewed. Their movements tracked. Their stories examined for inconsistencies. And yet, no arrests have been made. This could mean several things. It could mean law enforcement doesn't have enough evidence to charge anyone despite suspicions. It could mean the investigation has cleared those individuals. Or it could mean something else entirely that we don't know about. There's another element to this case that cannot be ignored: the family dynamics. By all accounts, and based on information that has become public, the Wells family had a complicated situation. Financial struggles. Substance abuse issues have been alleged. Child Protective Services had been involved with the family in the past, though the details of that involvement are not fully public. None of this proves anything about what happened to Summer. Plenty of families struggle with these issues and would never harm their children. But it does provide context. It helps explain why investigators looked closely at the family. Why questions were asked. Why scrutiny was intense. Candace Bly has given interviews where she has maintained her innocence and expressed her belief that Summer was abducted. She has described the pain of losing her daughter and the added trauma of being suspected by the public and possibly by law enforcement. She has said she wants answers just like everyone else. Don Wells has also maintained that he had nothing to do with Summer's disappearance. He has stated that he was at work when Summer went missing, which has apparently been verified. His alibi for the critical time period appears solid, though again, we don't know everything law enforcement knows. The 3 brothers who were present that day were interviewed by investigators. Children can be important witnesses, but interviewing young children requires special techniques. Their memories can be influenced by leading questions. Their sense of time is often imprecise. But they were there. They were in the kitchen. If something happened inside that house, they might have seen or heard something. What those boys told investigators has not been made public. We don't know if they saw Summer leave the house. We don't know if they heard anything unusual. We don't know if they saw anyone else. This information is being held close by law enforcement, and that's probably for good reason. As months turned into years, the active search efforts scaled back. This is inevitable in long-term missing persons cases. The massive coordinated searches that happened in the first weeks and months can't be sustained indefinitely. Resources are finite. Search teams have other cases. Life, as cruel as it sounds, goes on. But the investigation never stopped. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has continued to work the case. Tips still come in, though not at the volume they did initially. Investigators still follow up on credible leads. The case file grows thicker. But answers remain elusive. Summer's case has been featured on several national platforms. Unsolved Mysteries profiled her disappearance, bringing renewed attention and generating more tips. True crime podcasts have dedicated episodes to analyzing every detail. Social media groups dedicated to finding Summer have thousands of members who discuss theories and share information. This attention is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it keeps Summer's face in the public eye. It ensures people don't forget about her. It means that if someone, somewhere, knows something, they're more likely to be reminded to come forward. On the other hand, it creates noise. False tips. Conspiracy theories. Harassment of the family. Misinformation spreads as quickly as facts. One of the persistent theories that has circulated online involves trafficking. The idea that Summer was taken as part of a child trafficking operation. This theory gained traction in part because of the seemingly impossible nature of her disappearance. If she vanished without a trace, if no one saw or heard anything, maybe it was because professionals were involved. People who knew how to take a child quickly and quietly. Child trafficking is real. It's horrific. And it does happen. But law enforcement has not indicated that they believe Summer's case is related to trafficking. That doesn't definitively rule it out, but it's worth noting. Trafficking cases usually have different patterns. Different indicators. And while we don't know everything investigators know, the absence of any public statement linking this to trafficking suggests it's not their primary theory. Another theory that has been discussed extensively is that Summer's disappearance is somehow connected to the family's property or the area's history. Some have speculated about underground caverns or mine shafts where a child could fall and become trapped. Northeast Tennessee does have cave systems and old mining operations in some areas. Could Summer have fallen into something like that? Search teams would have looked for such hazards during their extensive search operations. Ground-penetrating radar was reportedly used in some areas. But the region is large, and it's possible something was missed. However, for Summer to have fallen into a cavern or mine shaft, she would have had to leave the house unnoticed and travel to wherever that hazard was located. And again, we come back to the timeline. 2 minutes. That's not much time. The supernatural has even entered the discussion in some circles. Unexplained disappearances have a way of attracting theories about the paranormal. People have suggested everything from alien abduction to interdimensional portals. While these theories make for interesting entertainment, they don't help find Summer. Law enforcement deals in evidence, in physical reality, in things that can be proven or disproven. What law enforcement has said publicly is limited but important. They have stated that this is an active investigation. They have said the case is outside the norm. They have encouraged anyone with information to come forward. They have emphasized that even small details that seem insignificant might be the piece that breaks the case open. The TBI has also made it clear that they have not given up. Special Agent in Charge Joey Sullivan has spoken about the case multiple times, always emphasizing the commitment to finding answers. He has acknowledged the frustration that the public feels, the frustration that Summer's family feels, and frankly, the frustration that investigators feel. Because this case should not be this hard to solve. That's the frustrating reality. Summer disappeared from her home in the presence of multiple people. Someone should have seen something. Heard something. Noticed something. The fact that no one apparently did is what makes this case so extraordinary and so troubling. Let's talk about what investigators do know, based on public statements and reports. They know Summer was alive and well that afternoon. They know she was with her grandmother. They know she came back to the house. They know approximately when she was last seen. They know who was present on the property. They have searched the property and surrounding areas extensively. They have interviewed everyone involved. They have followed up on thousands of tips. They have used every technological resource available. They have consulted with experts in child abduction, search and rescue, and forensic analysis. What they don't know is what happened in those crucial minutes. They don't know if Summer left the house on her own or if someone took her. They don't know if she's alive or deceased. They don't have a crime scene. They don't have physical evidence pointing to a specific perpetrator or even definitively indicating foul play. This is the nightmare scenario for investigators. A missing child with no clear explanation, no obvious suspects, and no physical evidence to follow. Cases like this can haunt detectives for their entire careers. Summer would be 9 years old now. 4th grade, probably. Old enough to read chapter books, to ride a bike without training wheels, to have opinions about music and movies and what she wants to be when she grows up. Somewhere, that little girl from the photographs is either living a life we can't imagine, or her story ended in a way too terrible to contemplate. Her family lives with this uncertainty every single day. Candace Bly has spoken about the impossibility of moving on when you don't have answers. How do you grieve when you don't know if your child is dead? How do you hope when years pass with no news? How do you function when every day brings the same questions and no new answers? Dawn Wells has also expressed the pain of not knowing. The frustration of being suspected, of having your past thrown in your face, of knowing that people think the worst of you. Guilty or innocent, the limbo of this situation is its own form of torture. Summer's brothers have grown older without their sister. They've lived through the trauma of her disappearance, the upheaval of the investigation, the public scrutiny of their family. Whatever they remember about that day, whatever they experienced, it's shaped their childhood in ways most kids never have to endure. The community of Beech Creek and the wider Hawkins County area have been affected too. This kind of case changes a place. Parents become more vigilant, more fearful. The sense of safety that comes from living in a quiet, rural area gets shattered. People look at neighbors differently. Trust erodes. And yet, communities can also come together in powerful ways. The volunteers who searched for Summer, who gave their time and energy and refused to quit even when professionals scaled back, demonstrated the best of humanity. Strangers who had never met Summer or her family spent hours walking through difficult terrain, calling her name, hoping against hope to find her. Local businesses donated supplies. People brought food for searchers. Churches held prayer vigils. The desire to bring Summer home united people from all walks of life. Even now, years later, there are people in that community who think about Summer regularly, who hope for a resolution, who want justice for a little girl they never knew. From an investigative standpoint, cases that go years without resolution face unique challenges. Memories fade. Witnesses move away or die. Physical evidence degrades. The longer a case remains unsolved, the harder it becomes to solve. But cases do get solved years later. Decades later sometimes. Advances in technology create new opportunities. DNA analysis that wasn't possible before becomes routine. Someone who was afraid to speak up years ago finds the courage to come forward. A deathbed confession. A guilty conscience that can't stay quiet anymore. Hope isn't lost, but it requires patience and persistence. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation maintains a missing persons database. Summer's information is there, along with hundreds of other individuals who have disappeared without explanation. Each one represents a family in pain, a community searching for answers, investigators who haven't given up. Summer's case is unusual even among this group. Most missing children are found relatively quickly, often within hours. When children aren't found quickly, it's usually because they were taken by a non-custodial parent, which is a different kind of case with different dynamics. Stranger abductions, while they get massive media attention, are statistically rare. And disappearances like Summer's, where a child vanishes from their own home with witnesses present and leaves no trace, are rarer still. This rarity is part of what has kept public interest alive. People are drawn to mysteries, especially mysteries that seem impossible. The human mind wants explanations. We want to understand how things happen. When something occurs that doesn't fit our understanding of how the world works, it creates cognitive dissonance. We have to resolve it somehow. That's part of why theories proliferate in cases like this. People are trying to create a narrative that makes sense, that explains the unexplainable. Some of these theories are grounded in possibility. Others venture into the realm of the fantastical. But they all represent the same impulse, the need to understand. For investigators, the challenge is to ignore the noise and focus on the facts. What can be proven? What does the evidence actually say? Where should resources be directed? These are questions that require discipline and experience to answer properly. One aspect of the investigation that has been mentioned publicly is the examination of the Wells family's electronic devices. Cell phones, computers, tablets. In modern investigations, digital forensics is crucial. These devices can reveal locations, communications, internet searches, and other information that might be relevant. What investigators found on these devices has not been made public. Did they find anything incriminating? Did they find anything that pointed toward Summer's fate? We don't know. The silence from law enforcement on this point could mean they found nothing of interest, or it could mean they found something they're not ready to reveal. There's also been discussion about whether Summer's disappearance might be connected to other cases. Were there other missing children in the area? Other unsolved crimes that might share similarities? Law enforcement routinely looks for connections between cases, especially when one case proves difficult to solve. As far as public information indicates, there are no clear connections between Summer's case and other regional disappearances. That doesn't mean investigators haven't looked or aren't still looking, but it does suggest that if there's a connection, it's not obvious. The media coverage of Summer's case has been extensive but has also waned over time. This is natural. When a child first goes missing, it's major news. As days turn to weeks without developments, coverage decreases. Other stories take precedence. The public's attention span is limited, and there are always new tragedies demanding focus. But families of missing persons will tell you that this decrease in coverage is agonizing. When the cameras leave, when the reporters stop calling, it can feel like the world is forgetting. Like your child's case is being abandoned. Maintaining public awareness becomes an uphill battle. Summer's family has tried to keep her case in the public eye. Social media has been a tool for this, though it's also been a source of pain as accusations and theories swirl. The balance between wanting publicity for the case and protecting yourself from harassment is difficult to strike. True crime content creators have played a role in maintaining awareness of Summer's case. Podcasts, YouTube videos, blog posts. This content keeps Summer's name circulating. It introduces her case to new audiences. And while some of this content is speculative or sensationalized, it all contributes to keeping the case alive in the public consciousness. There's an ethical debate within the true crime community about coverage of cases involving missing children and grieving families. On one hand, attention can help. It can generate tips. It can pressure law enforcement to keep working the case. It can prevent a case from going cold. On the other hand, it can harm. Families become targets of amateur sleuths who are convinced they've solved the case. Misinformation spreads. Privacy is invaded. Trauma is compounded. The line between helpful attention and harmful exploitation can be thin. In Summer's case, the family has had a complicated relationship with media coverage. They've participated in some interviews and documentaries, presumably hoping it will help. They've also experienced the dark side of public attention. The accusations. The judgment. The constant reminders of the worst day of their lives. Law enforcement has to navigate this landscape too. They need public assistance. Tips from the community can be vital. But they also need to control information and protect the integrity of the investigation. Too much disclosure can compromise a case. Too little can frustrate the public and potentially lose valuable leads. The FBI's involvement in Summer's case brought additional resources and expertise. The FBI has extensive experience with child abduction cases. They have behavioral analysts who can create profiles of potential perpetrators. They have databases that can identify patterns across multiple cases. They have forensic capabilities that smaller agencies might not possess. But even with FBI involvement, Summer's case has not been solved. This tells us something about just how difficult this particular case is. It's not for lack of effort or resources. It's not because investigators aren't competent. It's because something about this situation doesn't yield to normal investigative techniques. There are cases in criminal justice history that remain baffling despite enormous efforts to solve them. Cases where every logical explanation has been explored and ruled out. Cases where the evidence, or lack thereof, simply doesn't point to a clear conclusion. Summer's case may be joining this unfortunate category. But giving up is not an option. Somewhere, the truth about what happened to Summer Wells exists. Someone knows. Maybe it's one person. Maybe it's multiple people. But someone, somewhere, knows what happened in those 2 minutes. Maybe it's a person who was directly involved. Maybe it's someone who saw something and didn't realize its significance. Maybe it's someone who heard a confession or a suspicious statement and didn't report it. Maybe it's someone who has been afraid to come forward. To that person, whoever you are, wherever you are, law enforcement is still listening. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has a tip line. You can call anonymously. You can provide information without identifying yourself. Whatever you know, no matter how small it seems, it could be the piece that solves this puzzle. Even if you think what you know isn't important, let investigators make that determination. Even if years have passed, it's not too late. Even if you're afraid of the consequences, there are ways to come forward safely. Summer deserves to be found. Her family deserves answers. Justice deserves to be served. The passage of 4 years without resolution is significant, but it's not insurmountable. Cold cases get solved. Breakthroughs happen. Science advances. People's circumstances change and they become willing to talk when they weren't before. The case is still active. The investigation continues. What would a resolution look like at this point? The best-case scenario, the one everyone hopes for but seems increasingly unlikely, is that Summer is found alive. That she was taken but is safe somewhere. That she can be reunited with her family. After 4 years, this seems improbable, but it's not impossible. Children have been found alive after extended periods. Hope is not completely gone. A more realistic resolution would be finding Summer's remains and determining what happened to her. This would be devastating, but it would provide closure. It would allow for a proper burial. It would potentially bring criminal charges against whoever is responsible. It would end the uncertainty. The worst outcome is that this case never gets solved. That Summer becomes a permanent question mark. That her family never knows what happened. That whoever is responsible never faces justice. That decades from now, people are still wondering what became of the little girl who disappeared from her kitchen in rural Tennessee. As someone who covers these cases, who tries to bring attention to the missing and the unsolved, I can tell you that unresolved cases are uniquely painful. They represent a failure of our justice system, even when everyone involved did their best. They represent questions without answers in a world that desperately wants answers to everything. Summer's case has all the elements that make a mystery compelling. The impossible disappearance. The isolated setting. The limited timeline. The absence of evidence. The multiple theories. But we have to remember that this isn't entertainment. This is a real child. A real family. Real grief and real loss. When we discuss theories, when we analyze the timeline, when we speculate about what might have happened, we're talking about a little girl who loved candy and planting flowers with her grandmother. A little girl who should be in 4th grade right now, learning multiplication tables and making friends and discovering who she is. Instead, she's been frozen in time as a 5-year-old in photographs, forever wearing that pink shirt, forever walking across that yard on June 15, 2021. The impact of a case like this extends far beyond the immediate family. It touches everyone who hears the story. Parents hold their children a little tighter. They become more vigilant, more aware of how quickly something can go wrong. The illusion of safety that we all rely on to function in daily life gets shattered. Because if Summer could disappear from her own home with her mother watching, with her brothers present, in broad daylight, then it could happen to anyone. That's the terrifying takeaway. There was no obvious mistake made. No clear negligence. Just a momentary lapse in direct supervision, the kind that happens in households across America every single day without consequence. This raises uncomfortable questions about blame and responsibility. Was someone at fault for what happened to Summer? If she was taken, then obviously the person who took her bears complete responsibility. But in the aftermath, when people are looking for explanations, they often look for mistakes that were made. Should Summer have been watched more closely? Should the property have been more secure? Should the family have lived somewhere less isolated? These questions come from a desire to believe that we can prevent these tragedies if we just do everything right. But the truth is, sometimes terrible things happen despite our best efforts. This doesn't mean we shouldn't take precautions. It doesn't mean supervision doesn't matter. It means that we live in a world where risk cannot be eliminated entirely, and that's a frightening reality to accept. The Wells family has had to live with second-guessing and judgment from strangers who weren't there, who don't know the full circumstances, but who feel entitled to opinions about what should have been done differently. This is one of the cruelest aspects of public tragedy. The armchair quarterbacking. The assumption that if you had been in that situation, you would have prevented it. But would you have? If you're watching your child play in the yard and you look away for 60 seconds to adjust your knee brace, are you negligent? If you assume your child is safe inside the house with their siblings and you don't maintain visual contact every single second, are you to blame if something happens? Most people would say no. Most people recognize that constant, uninterrupted surveillance of children is neither practical nor healthy. Children need some degree of autonomy and freedom. Parents need to be able to function, to do other tasks, to trust that their home environment is safe. The problem is that we judge these situations in hindsight. We know something terrible happened, so we look back and see every moment of non-supervision as a failure. But in the moment, before anything went wrong, those same moments were just normal life. This is not to absolve anyone of responsibility if it turns out that someone in Summer's life was involved in her disappearance. If the investigation eventually reveals that someone harmed her, that person deserves to be held fully accountable. But in the absence of such a revelation, casting blame on her family for not preventing something they didn't know was going to happen seems cruel and unproductive. What we should focus on instead is finding Summer. That's the priority. That's what matters. Everything else is secondary. The investigative techniques used in Summer's case represent the cutting edge of missing persons investigations. Beyond the physical searches and interviews, investigators have employed a range of specialized methods. Cell phone location data can show where people were at specific times. Cell towers ping phones regularly, creating a record of movement. If someone drove away from the Wells property with Summer, their phone would have left a trail. The absence of such a trail from family members' phones during the critical time period is one piece of information investigators would have examined. Forensic analysis of the family's property would have been extensive. Luminol testing can reveal blood that's been cleaned up. Cadaver dogs can detect human remains even when nothing is visible to the naked eye. Soil samples can be analyzed. Every inch of that property would have been scrutinized for evidence. The fact that no evidence of foul play has been publicly announced doesn't mean the property was clean. It might mean that any evidence found was inconclusive or didn't lead anywhere. Or it might mean that investigators are holding information back for strategic reasons. Digital forensics, as mentioned earlier, would have examined all electronic devices. But this goes beyond just looking at recent activity. Deleted files can often be recovered. Internet history, even when erased, can leave traces. Messages sent through apps, even encrypted ones, sometimes leave metadata. Experts in this field can extract information that the average person would never know existed. Financial records would have been examined as well. Large cash withdrawals, unusual purchases, payments to unknown individuals, all of these could be relevant. If someone paid another person to take Summer, there might be a financial trail. Polygraph examinations were reportedly conducted, though the results have not been made public. Polygraphs are controversial in the investigative community. They're not admissible in court in most jurisdictions because they're not perfectly reliable. People can fail polygraphs when telling the truth if they're anxious. Some people can pass them while lying. But polygraphs can still be useful investigatively. They can help investigators decide where to focus their efforts. A failed polygraph doesn't prove guilt, but it might indicate deception that warrants further examination. A passed polygraph doesn't prove innocence, but it might move someone lower on the suspect list. We don't know who took polygraphs in Summer's case or what the results were. This information has been kept confidential, which is typical. But you can be sure it's part of the investigative record. Behavioral analysis is another tool that would have been employed. FBI behavioral analysts study patterns in crimes. They create profiles of potential perpetrators based on characteristics of the crime itself. In an abduction case, they might look at things like, was the victim targeted specifically or chosen opportunistically? Was planning involved or was it impulsive? Does the crime show organization or disorganization? In Summer's case, the lack of a clear crime scene makes behavioral analysis challenging. But analysts would still examine what is known and try to draw conclusions. The fact that Summer disappeared so quickly suggests either very good planning or very good luck on the perpetrator's part. The absence of physical evidence suggests either careful cleanup or that Summer left the property alive. These kinds of inferences don't solve cases by themselves, but they help investigators form hypotheses about what they're dealing with. The public's role in cases like Summer's cannot be overstated. While law enforcement does the official investigating, tips from the public are often what break cases open. Someone who saw a vehicle they didn't recognize. Someone who noticed a neighbor acting strangely. Someone who heard something that didn't seem right at the time. The challenge is separating useful tips from noise. In high-profile cases, tip lines get flooded. Some tips are well-meaning but ultimately useless. Some are from people who want attention. Some are from individuals with mental health issues who confess to crimes they didn't commit. And buried in all of that are potentially the one or two tips that actually matter. Investigators have to follow up on everything, or at least everything that meets a threshold of credibility. This is time-consuming and resource-intensive. It's also necessary. You never know which tip is going to be the one that matters. In Summer's case, over 6,500 tips have been received. That's an enormous number. Each one represents someone who thought they had information worth reporting. Even if only a small percentage of those tips were credible, that's still hundreds of leads to chase down. Some of those tips led to searches in specific locations. Some led to interviews with specific individuals. Some were ruled out quickly. Others required extensive investigation before they could be eliminated. And some may still be active leads being pursued. The frustration for the public is not knowing what's happening behind the scenes. Is the investigation making progress that just hasn't been announced? Or has it genuinely stalled? Are there suspects being watched who haven't been charged? Or is law enforcement truly baffled with no clear direction? These questions don't have public answers, and that's by design. But it creates a vacuum that speculation rushes to fill. One theory that has persisted in online communities is that Summer's case is somehow connected to organized crime or drug activity in the area. Rural Appalachia has struggled with drug issues, particularly methamphetamine and opioids. Some have speculated that the Wells family had connections to this world and that Summer's disappearance is related. Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed or denied any connection to drug activity. If such a connection exists, it would be a sensitive aspect of the investigation. Drug-related crimes often involve networks of people who are afraid to talk because of threats or their own legal exposure. If Summer was taken as retaliation for something drug-related, that would be a particularly heinous crime. Using a child to send a message or settle a score represents a level of depravity that's difficult to comprehend. But it has happened in other cases. Cartels and criminal organizations have been known to target family members, including children. However, there's no public evidence supporting this theory. It remains speculation based on the area's general issues with drugs rather than anything specific to Summer's case. Another angle that has been discussed is the possibility of a custody dispute or family conflict. Were there relatives who wanted custody of Summer or her brothers? Was there a family member who felt wronged or excluded? Family dynamics can be complex, and sometimes that complexity turns dangerous. Again, law enforcement has not indicated publicly that this is a line of investigation they're pursuing. But in any missing child case, investigators look at the family tree. They examine relationships. They ask about conflicts. They try to identify anyone who might have had a motive. The absence of any public identification of a suspect in Summer's case after 4 years is significant. It suggests one of several possibilities. Either law enforcement doesn't know who is responsible. Or they know but can't prove it. Or the person responsible is deceased or otherwise beyond reach. Or the situation is so complex that building a prosecutable case is taking years. Whichever scenario is true, the result is the same: no resolution, no justice, no answers. For Summer's siblings, growing up in the shadow of their sister's disappearance must be incredibly difficult. Children process trauma differently than adults. They may not fully understand what happened. They may blame themselves. They may have recurring nightmares or anxiety. They may struggle to trust the world around them. The psychological impact on children who lose a sibling is well documented. When that loss involves unclear circumstances and public scrutiny, the impact is magnified. These boys have had to cope with losing their sister, dealing with the investigation, enduring public attention, and navigating whatever family stress resulted from all of this. They deserve compassion and privacy, which they haven't always received. In the age of social media, people feel entitled to comment on every aspect of public cases. These children's lives have been dissected by strangers who have no right to judge or interfere. One hope is that as they grow older, they'll be able to process their experiences and perhaps provide additional information if they remember anything. Children's memories can become clearer with age. Things that didn't seem important at 5 or 6 or 7 might take on new significance at 10 or 12 or 15. Investigators sometimes re-interview witnesses years later for this reason. Time and maturity can change perspective. If Summer's brothers were very young at the time of her disappearance, they might remember more now than they could articulate then. The community of Hawkins County has tried to heal while still remembering Summer. Memorials have been held. Ribbons and posters have been displayed. Local churches have prayed for her return. The community hasn't forgotten, but it has had to learn to live with the unanswered questions. For small communities, a case like this becomes part of the local identity. It's the thing people from outside associate with the area. It's the tragedy that defines a moment in time. Hawkins County will be connected to Summer Wells' disappearance for as long as the case remains unsolved. There's also an economic impact, though it's rarely discussed. The massive search operation required resources. Law enforcement hours. Equipment. Helicopter flights. Dive teams. All of this costs money. For rural counties with limited budgets, sustained major investigations create financial strain. This is not to suggest that the cost isn't worth it. Finding a missing child is priceless. But it is a reality that affects how long certain intensive efforts can be maintained. Eventually, the helicopters stop flying. The search teams go home. The daily presence of investigators decreases. The case continues, but in a different form. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has committed to keeping Summers' case active indefinitely. They've said they will never close it until it's solved. That's the right approach, but it also means the file sits among hundreds of other open cases competing for attention and resources. Advances in technology offer some hope for older cases. DNA analysis has become more sophisticated. Genetic genealogy, the technique that caught the Golden State Killer, can identify suspects through family DNA databases. If there's biological evidence in Summers' case, future technology might be able to extract more information from it than is currently possible. Artificial intelligence is also beginning to be used in investigations. AI can analyze vast amounts of data and identify patterns that human investigators might miss. It can cross-reference details from thousands of tips and highlight connections. While AI can't replace human judgment, it can be a powerful tool. Surveillance camera networks have expanded even in rural areas. Businesses, homes, and even vehicles now have cameras that record continuously. If Summer was taken from the property in a vehicle, there might be camera footage from somewhere along the route. Investigators would have canvassed for this immediately, but additional cameras may have been installed since then that could be checked if new information about routes or timing emerges. The digital footprint we all leave is constantly growing. Even people who think they're being careful online leave traces. If Summers' case involved online communication, planning, or coordination, those digital breadcrumbs might still exist somewhere, waiting to be found. But technology is only useful if there's something to apply it to. If Summer walked into the woods and succumbed to the elements in a location that hasn't been searched, no amount of digital forensics will find her. If someone took her and left no trace, all the AI in the world can't create evidence that doesn't exist. This brings us back to the fundamental question that has haunted this case from the beginning: how does a child disappear without a trace? In the history of missing children cases, there are precedents for seemingly impossible disappearances. Asha Degree walked out of her home in North Carolina in 2000 and disappeared along a highway. Deor Coons vanished from a campground in Idaho while his parents were nearby. Kieran Horman disappeared from his school in Oregon. These cases remain unsolved, each one presenting its own impossible puzzle. What these cases have in common is the absence of witnesses to the critical moment. No one actually saw what happened. There are last known sightings, and then nothing. The gap between the last sighting and the discovery that the child is missing is where the mystery lives. In Summers' case, that gap is extraordinarily small. 2 minutes. Maybe less. Maybe it was 90 seconds. Maybe 60. Whatever the exact duration, it was a brief window. And in that window, a child vanished. If Summer left the house voluntarily, she would have had to cross the yard without her mother seeing her. Possible, if Candace was focused on her knee brace and not looking up. Summer could have walked quickly toward the woods. But her brothers were in the kitchen. Wouldn't they have seen her leave through the door she had just entered? Unless she left through a different exit. Houses have multiple doors. If Summer went out a back door or a side door, she might have been out of sight of everyone. But why would she do that? Where would she have been going? Was she chasing something? Following someone? Or just exploring? 5-year-olds don't always need reasons that make sense to adults. They act on impulse. They see something interesting and go investigate. Maybe Summer saw an animal. Maybe she heard something. Maybe she just decided to go back outside. But if she left the house and walked into the woods, she should have been found. Even if she got lost, even if she got injured, the search effort was massive and thorough. The idea that a child could disappear into the wilderness and leave no trace in an area that was subsequently searched by hundreds of people using advanced technology seems implausible. Which brings us back to the possibility that someone took her. Someone who was either already in the house or who entered in that brief window. Someone who had the opportunity and the means to remove Summer from the property quickly. If someone was in the house, it would almost certainly have to be someone who belonged there. A stranger hiding in a house waiting for an opportunity would be too risky. They'd have to know the layout, know the family's patterns, and be willing to act with multiple witnesses nearby. A family member or someone close to the family would have access without raising suspicion. They could be in the house legitimately. They could take Summer without her crying out, because she knew them and trusted them. They could potentially leave the property without it seeming unusual. But again, we're back to the timeline. 2 minutes to grab a child, exit the house, get to a vehicle, and drive away without anyone noticing. It's possible, but it requires precision and luck. Unless the timeline is wrong. Memory is fallible, especially in traumatic situations. When Candace Bly says she looked away for a couple of minutes, is that accurate? Could it have been longer? When stress and panic set in, when you're searching frantically for your child, your sense of time distorts. 2 minutes might have actually been 5 or 10. This isn't to accuse anyone of lying. It's simply acknowledging that human memory, especially regarding duration of time, is unreliable. Investigators would have tried to establish the timeline through other means. Cell phone records. Security camera timestamps if any existed nearby. Statements from other people present. But in a rural setting without extensive camera coverage, without multiple independent witnesses, the timeline remains somewhat uncertain. And that uncertainty is important because it affects what was possible. The more time that elapsed, the more options open up for what could have happened. If it was actually 10 or 15 minutes instead of 2, that's enough time for a child to wander much farther. It's enough time for someone to carry out a more complex abduction. It's enough time for something else we haven't even considered to have occurred. Investigators know all of this. They've examined the timeline from every angle. They've tested theories. They've done walkthroughs to see how long various scenarios would take. The fact that they haven't announced a conclusion suggests the timeline doesn't definitively support any single theory. So where does that leave us? For years after Summer Wells disappeared, we have more questions than answers. We have a case that defies easy explanation. We have a family still waiting for news. We have investigators still working. We have a community still hoping. And we have a little girl who deserves to be found. The reality of unsolved cases is that sometimes they stay unsolved. Not because investigators don't care. Not because they didn't try hard enough. But because the circumstances aligned in such a way that the truth remains hidden. Evidence that should exist doesn't. Witnesses who should have seen something didn't. The pieces that should fit together don't. This is cold comfort to Summer's family. Knowing that investigators did everything they could doesn't bring her back. Understanding that some cases are just genuinely difficult to solve doesn't ease the pain of not knowing. But it's important to acknowledge that law enforcement has thrown enormous resources at this case. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The FBI. Local sheriff's departments. Search and rescue teams. Forensic specialists. Behavioral analysts. Everyone who could help has been involved. If the answer was easy to find, they would have found it. The fact that it hasn't been found doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means it's well hidden, either deliberately or by chance. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened to Summer Wells. That person carries the weight of that knowledge. Maybe they're the person responsible. Maybe they witnessed something and stayed silent out of fear. Maybe they heard a confession and chose not to report it. Maybe they saw something that day that seemed innocent but was actually crucial. To that person, it's not too late. For years have passed, but the investigation is still active. Your information still matters. Even if you think you'll get in trouble for not coming forward sooner, the priority is finding Summer. Prosecutors can sometimes offer deals for information. And even if there are consequences for your silence, living with the truth has to be better than living with the secret. The tip line is still open. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation is still taking calls. You can remain anonymous if you need to. You can share what you know without necessarily exposing yourself. There are ways to get information to investigators while protecting yourself. And if you're the person who took Summer, if you're the person responsible for her disappearance, you need to understand that this will catch up to you eventually. Cases get solved decades later. Technology improves. People talk. Secrets come out. You can end this now on your terms, or you can wait for it to end on someone else's terms. But it will end. For everyone else who has followed this case, who has cared about Summer, who wants to see justice, there are things you can do. Keep sharing her information. Keep her face in public view. If you're on social media, share posts about her case. Talk about it. Don't let people forget. If you live in Tennessee or nearby areas, stay alert. If you see a girl who could be Summer, who would be about 9 years old now, don't assume someone else will report it. Call authorities. Let them check it out. It might be nothing, but it might be everything. Support organizations that work to find missing children. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children does incredible work. They provide resources for families and law enforcement. They keep databases. They coordinate searches. They never stop working to bring children home. Donate if you can. Volunteer if you're able. Even just spreading awareness helps. Every set of eyes that knows about Summer, every person who recognizes her face, is another potential break in the case. And finally, learn from this case. Not in a way that leads to paranoia or prevents children from living normal lives, but in a way that reinforces the importance of vigilance. Watch your children. Know where they are. Make sure they know how to get help if they need it. Create safety plans for your family. Because while we can't prevent every tragedy, we can reduce risk. We can be prepared. We can give our children the tools they need to stay safe. And we can create communities where people watch out for each other, where suspicious activity gets reported, where children are protected. Summer Wells should be here. She should be in 4th grade. She should be arguing with her brothers and helping her grandmother plant flowers and living her life. The fact that she's not, the fact that no one knows where she is or what happened to her, is a tragedy that touches everyone who hears her story. But her story isn't over. As long as people are still looking, as long as investigators are still working, as long as there's hope that the truth will come out, her story continues. And this community, this true crime community that you're part of by watching this video, plays a role in keeping that story alive. Don't scroll past her face when you see it. Don't dismiss her case as just another unsolved mystery. Remember that she's real. She was real. She had favorite foods and favorite toys and people who loved her. She had a whole life ahead of her that was stolen in 2 minutes. Remember Summer Moon Utah Wells. Remember her blonde hair and blue eyes. Remember that she was 5 years old when she disappeared from her home in rural Tennessee on June 15, 2021. Remember that 4 years later, her family still has no answers. And remember that your awareness, your attention, your willingness to care about a child you never met, matters. Because solving cases like this requires all of us. Law enforcement does the official work, but the public provides the eyes, the ears, the tips that make breakthroughs possible. We're all part of this. We all have a role to play in bringing Summer home. This has been the story of Summer Wells, one of the most baffling missing child cases in modern American history. A case that shouldn't be this difficult to solve. A case that has consumed thousands of hours of investigative work. A case that has touched hearts across the nation. A case that remains, frustratingly and heartbreakingly, unsolved. But unsolved doesn't mean forgotten. It doesn't mean abandoned. It means the search continues. The investigation goes on. The hope, however fragile, remains. Somewhere out there is the answer to what happened in those 2 minutes. Somewhere out there is the truth about Summer Wells. And until that truth comes to light, until Summer is found, until justice is served, we won't stop asking questions. We won't stop searching. We won't stop caring. Because that's what Cold Case Crimelab is about. We shine a light on cases that need attention. We tell the stories that deserve to be told. We give voice to victims who can't speak for themselves. And we never, ever give up on finding the truth. If this case has affected you, if Summer's story has moved you to want to help, here's what you can do right now. Subscribe to this channel. Every subscriber helps the algorithm show these videos to more people. More people means more awareness. More awareness means more chance that someone with information will see it and come forward. Hit the like button. Leave a comment. Share this video on your social media. Send it to people you think should know about Summer's case. The more this spreads, the better chance we have of reaching someone who knows something. And turn on notifications so you don't miss updates. If there's a break in this case, if new information comes out, you'll want to know immediately. This channel will cover it. We'll bring you every development, every piece of news, every step forward in the search for Summer Wells. This is Cold Case Crimelab, where we don't just report on cold cases, we fight to keep them warm. Where we don't just tell stories, we seek justice. Where we don't just ask questions, we demand answers. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of the community that refuses to let missing children be forgotten. Justice doesn't sleep, and neither do we. Remember Summer Wells. Share her story. And never stop hoping that one day, we'll have the answers her family deserves.